Hey! As you guys can see, things are a little bit redder tonight, and also significantly more dangerous. There's a blood moon out, and that tends to bring out some pretty nasty animals. Don't worry about me though, I'll be fine. You see, my house was actually a survival shelter before I started squatting in it, so as long as I don't open that door, I'm safe. But since I'm kind of bored just sitting here, let's pass the time by talking about a video game. Koji Igarashi is a game dev who used to work on the Castlevania series back in the 1990s and 2000s. Of course, Castlevania is owned by Konami, and working with them seems to be hell, so he eventually quit to work on his own project, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, a game very heavily inspired by Castlevania. He launched a Kickstarter for the game back in 2015. He asked for $500,000 to fund the project, a goal that he was just barely able to meet. Actually, that's a lie. He made 11 times that. The game eventually came out 4 years later and achieved critical acclaim. Now, since this is my video you're watching, I'm sure you want to know my opinion on it. Well, guess what? I don't have one. I have never even played this game. Sorry if you felt misled, but I had to mention this Kickstarter because the game I am talking about exists as a direct result of it. You see, one of the backer goals for Ritual of the Night was the promise of getting a short, 8-bit styled game released a year prior. That game was 2018's Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, and that is what this video is actually about. I first learned of this game shortly after it was released. I heard the game was fun, saw it was cheap, and picked it up based on those two factors alone, despite my lack of experience with Castlevania at the time. After I finished my first run, I was head over heels in love with it. I thought the stage design was excellent, the characters were all fun to use, the music was phenomenal. I thought this game was as close to perfect as you could realistically get with a platformer. Over the next 8 years, I would continue to come back to it, each run only further confirming my initial impressions. Of course, I can't just make a video where I blindly gush about a game without any real analysis. Well, actually, I could do that, but I'd feel kind of bad about it. So for this video, I'm going to put the rose-tinted goggles down and be a little more objective. Is this actually a masterpiece like I thought it was? Let's find out. Alright, let's knock the story out of the way first. Curse of the Moon stars this guy, Zangetsu, a swordsman who's been cursed by demons. The details of his curse are never actually explained to us, but I guess it must have been really bad because afterward, he dedicated his entire life to eradicating demons. One day, he receives word that the powerful demon Gremory is residing in a nearby castle, so Zangetsu heads out, determined to make her feel the wrath of his blade. Along the way, he runs into fellow adventurers Miriam, Alfred, and Jeeble, who are held hostage by Gremory's minions. Zangetsu recognizes them as shardbinders and alchemists, humans who use demonic energy to enhance their base abilities. And considering that he was cursed by demons, yeah, he's not happy with them doing that. When he finds them, Zangetsu can do one of 3 things. He can reluctantly recruit them into his party, which gives you more characters to mess around with. He can walk right past them, which does nothing for you and is easily the worst option. Or, he can kill them on the spot and steal their demonic energy for himself. When Zangetsu reaches the top of the castle, he slays Gremory, and depending on your decisions up to this point, there are a few different endings. If you killed everyone, then Gremory releases all of her demonic energy into Zangetsu, corrupting him into her successor. If you ignored everyone, then the adventurers swoop in to save Zangetsu at the last second, allowing him to escape, but getting themselves killed in the process. If you recruited everyone, then Gremory attempts to corrupt Miriam, Alfred, and Jeeble, but Zangetsu jumps in front of them and absorbs the demon's energy into himself, much to the astonishment of his partners and Zangetsu. His allies make their escape, but not wanting Zangetsu to suffer as a Dark Emperor, they agree to re-enter the castle and save his life. This leads into Nightmare Mode, which is basically just a hard mode with the final stage swapped out with something else. Oh, and no Zangetsu, obviously. Ordinarily, I'd be pretty annoyed having to play through the whole game all over again just to get the real ending, but Bloodstained is only 90 minutes long, so replaying it isn't very daunting. At the end of Nightmare Mode, Zangetsu's allies make their way into his throne room, and with the protection of Miriam and Jeeble, Alfred is able to cast a spell that puts Zangetsu's soul to rest. Their failure to save their friend weighs heavily on their hearts, but the trio vow to move forward and carry his memory with them. Meanwhile, in a post-credits scene, Zangetsu is revealed to have somehow survived, finding himself in what appears to be a very futuristic world. Where exactly is he? Did he time travel? Did he get isekai'd to another dimension? Surely the sequel will answer these most important questions. When you beat Nightmare Mode and get all of the endings in normal mode, you unlock Ultimate Mode. This is an even more difficult version of the game, but to counter that, it lets you have your cake and eat it too by letting you recruit all of the adventurers and make use of Zangetsu's demonic abilities. It doesn't contribute anything to the story though, so it's really just there for people who love the game and don't mind playing it for a 5th time. This story had its moments, with the endings in particular being highlights for me, but I can't say that I'm all too impressed by it. Fortunately for Curse of the Moon, however, that's not a strike against it. This is a platformer that harkens back to the 8-bit era. If you picked this up, it wasn't because you were super intrigued by the plot. You just wanted a fun game to sink your teeth into. And thankfully, Curse of the Moon is a very fun game. So before I talk about anything else, I need to talk about the control. Unlike most modern platformers, but very much like the original Castlevania games, you don't have any mid-air control. If you don't make sure there's ground underneath your landing spot, you'll be careening to your death. You'd think this would be a big issue, but Curse of the Moon's levels are designed in such a way that it works. There was never a moment where I had to take a leap of faith or where something was obstructing my vision. Even small moving platforms are placed in such a way that you can always jump onto them if you time things right. When I died from falling into some instant kill obstacle, I didn't feel like I was cheated out of a life. Actually, hold on. There is one way you can change your jump arc in midair. Knockback. Again, like in Castlevania, enemies will send you sprawling backwards upon contact. This isn't really a big deal in most situations, but in levels like Defiler of Taboos, it turns getting hit into a death sentence. One thing I really appreciate is that if you have multiple characters with you, you don't actually lose a life until all of them are dead. On one hand, this allows for up to 4 times the number of opportunities to clear sections of a level. The downside of this is that when a character dies, you can't use that character until you either clear the current stage or all of the others get killed afterward. And this is a bigger problem than you might think. In each stage, you can find one of these flashing objects, and when you pick it up, it upgrades your party in some way, giving them more health, defense, attack strength, or sub-weapon points. Usually, however, the item can only be obtained if you have the right character. Take this one in the Frigid Hell. If you don't have Miriam or Jebel with you by the time you get to this section, you simply won't be able to pick it up because they're the only characters that can fit through small gaps. All of these factors contribute to a Zangetsu only run being significantly more difficult, since not only will you be immediately down a life upon one death, but you'll be forced to skip over most of the upgrades. Well, now that I'm actually thinking about it, depending on which characters died, you may have to just take a life anyway to get them back. In Nightmare Mode, during the boss at the end of the Brilliant Void, I only had Alfred and Jebel left in my party, and neither of them are particularly good at this fight because they can't destroy his coin mountains fast enough. So I was basically put in a position where I had to commit suicide just so I could actually fight the boss. That did not make me feel good. Okay, let's talk about specific characters. Starting with Zangetsu. He wields a sword that's pretty short, but also very fast, so it's not too hard to lay on damage with it. I find that he's a pretty good character to use under most circumstances. He doesn't have any special movement abilities at the start, but as mentioned earlier, he can gain some by killing the other adventurers. By killing Miriam, he gets the Crescent Moon, a wide-ranged aerial attack. I find it pretty useful for dealing with flying enemies. By killing Alfred, he gets the Blood Moon, which is a double jump, and I don't think I need to explain how useful that is in a platformer. Finally, by killing Jebel, he gets the New Moon, which lets him dash. This is fun to use, but it's kind of a risk when platforming in areas with bottomless pits. Hey, so I'm cutting in unscripted because I actually forgot to talk about one of Zangetsu's abilities. If you play the game in Ultimate Mode, Zangetsu gets this charged up attack that does a lot of damage in a pretty huge area. For some reason, the game doesn't tell you that you can do this, but I will say that I thought the attack was pretty fun. Unfortunately, it kind of breaks the balance of the game, because this is like way stronger than anything else in your arsenal. When I play Ultimate Mode, it's really tempting for me to just use Zangetsu all the time, because none of the other characters have anything that compares to this. Of course, I got a lot of use out of the other characters too. Much like Zangetsu, Miriam is another character who's pretty useful in most situations. She has this whip attack that covers a much wider range than Zangetsu's sword, but it's not quite as fast, and I'm not sure it does as much damage. She can slide on the ground to get through tight gaps, and she has a high jump that gives me mixed feelings. On one hand, I like that she has more room to dodge oncoming enemies and projectiles, but on the other hand, the platforming challenges seem very much designed with the regular jump arc in mind, so it's easy to overshoot with her. Overall though, she's a welcome addition to the cast. Alfred is a character who's pretty situational. His basic attack is hitting enemies with his staff, which is neither fast nor powerful. He also has a pitifully small amount of health, so I get worried when he's out for too long. His main gimmick is that, despite his frail constitution, he actually has the best sub-weapons in the game. I'll talk more about those later, but just know that those do make up for his deficiencies. And finally, there's Jebel. He's not as much of an all-rounder as Zangetsu and Miriam, but I definitely had him out more than Alfred. Jebel's basic attack is summoning these... I don't really know what these are, bats, I guess? Anyway, they curve upward. This is actually the strongest attack in the game if you're able to get them all to land. But that is an if. When dealing with enemies that are lower to the ground, Jebel is pretty much worthless because he just can't hit them. Despite this, there were still a lot of instances where he proved himself to be a worthy member of my party. Throughout every level, you'll come across these lanterns. Most of them are going to be colored orange, and these ones just contain a variety of useful items like health pickups. but occasionally you'll see one of these purple ones that contain additional weapons for your party members. Using these weapons drains your weapon points, however, so you'll have to be a little bit more reserved with them. I find that their usefulness can vary from weapon to weapon, so I'm gonna do what all the cool kids are doing and put them on a tier list. Zangetsu has 3 sub-weapons: the Ball and Chain, Magic Charm, and Demon Essence. The Ball and Chain lets him attack upward and diagonally, and is pretty powerful to boot. I do like this since it allows me to take out threats coming at me from a tricky angle, but it's kind of overshadowed by another character's weapon that does something similar. This is a B tier. The Magic Charm is the opposite of this. It's thrown diagonally downward and leaves behind a small black hole that repeatedly damages any enemies that come into contact with it. I find that it's a pretty big help with taking out threats at awkward angles, but because there's no other weapon in the game that's fired like this, it's a bit more useful. A tier. The Demon Essence allows Zangetsu to temporarily increase his attack power. This is pretty useful in situations where you gotta take out an enemy quickly, but personally I tend to prefer weapons that give me range rather than strength. For me, a C tier. Miriam has 4 sub-weapons: the dagger, rapiers, axe, and sickle. The dagger is a low-cost, long-range weapon that shoots out horizontally. Unfortunately, it's also pretty weak, and it takes so long to take out most enemies that I'd rather just get up close and risk taking damage. D tier. Remember when I mentioned the Ball and Chain got outclassed by something else? Well, that something else are the rapiers. Miriam can fire 3 of these at once in an upward diagonal direction, which is useful for taking out enemies before they become a threat. They also do a lot of damage if all 3 manage to hit, which makes them very effective against bosses. These are lovely. A tier. Next up, the axe. This is a melee weapon that takes a while to charge up, but when it hits, it does an insane amount of damage. It can also break past sturdy barriers to access shorter routes. It's no rapier, but it's still very good. B tier. Finally, there's the sickle, which acts like a boomerang. This is very effective in situations where there's a lot of projectiles coming at you from the left or the right, and not much else. I like the idea, but I find it too situational to be willing to carry it all the time. D tier. Like Miriam, Alfred has 4 sub-weapons: the Burning Sphere, Frost Caliber, Soul Vision, and Voltaic Ray. The Burning Sphere creates a fire shield that blocks all projectiles and instantly kills weaker enemies. This is a really useful weapon for situations where you need to focus on your platforming, and in a platformer, those are going to come up a lot. This is an A tier. Easily. The Frost Caliber is a projectile that instantly freezes any enemies it comes into contact with. When they're stuck in a block of ice, they can be killed in one hit. When used against bosses, they take double damage from your next attack, which makes combining this with Miriam's axe a great option to take these guys down fast. Surprisingly, it can also freeze lanterns, which allows the player to use them as platforms and open up new routes. You can also use it to freeze some instant kill hazards. Considering how versatile it is, I'd be a fool to not put it in A tier. The Soul Vision allows Alfred to project a clone of himself directly in front of him. In all my years of playing this game, I have never found an instance where this is useful. Anything that it could theoretically do can be done better by other sub-weapons, and when I accidentally pick it up, every single person around me can hear me sigh in frustration. F tier. No doubt about it. Avoid this like the plague. Finally, the Voltaic Ray can generate up to 3 electrical spheres that home in on the nearest enemy. Strangely enough, this weapon actually can't be obtained from purple lanterns. It can only be found in these green lanterns that show up once per stage. And that's probably for the best, because this weapon is crazy overpowered and an easy A tier. Finally, Jebel only has 1 sub-weapon: Immortal Metamorphosis. This lets him turn into a bat and fly in any direction the player wants, slowly draining your magic every second that it's activated. The uses for this are numerous. You can clear large gaps, sneak through tight corridors, grab extra items, and skip entire chunks of levels. In this form, Jebel can also defend himself by dashing forward to take out weaker enemies. This might be the only sub-weapon that he has, but it's so damn good that I have to give it an A tier. Looking back at all the characters' weapons and abilities, you can really do a lot with them. Some may be more consistently useful than others, but I would say that all characters prove their worth more than enough throughout the journey. I really dig Curse of the Moon's level motifs. They did a great job making each stage feel special. Visually, I'd say my favorites were Moonlight Temptation, Sunder the Night, Defiler of Taboos, and Fallen Moon's Requiem. If I have to name a least favorite, then I'd probably go with the Brilliant Void. It's just way too monocolor for my liking, you know? I'm also a big fan of the enemy designs. There's a lot of variety here, from beefy rock golems to bunny girls to whatever the hell this is. The end stage bosses were especially great. Each one does such a fantastic job of being super imposing to a first-timer. Of course, to go along with your visuals, you need some kick-ass music too. And Curse of the Moon served us incredibly well in this regard. Now, I'm not going to pretend to understand exactly what makes a track catchy to me, but I will say that, at least for me, Curse of the Moon has some of my favorite 8-bit arrangements ever. Here are some highlights. One interesting quirk about these levels is that they're actually pretty non-linear. On your journey, you'll find the remains of fallen adventurers, who always point to the shortest path forward. Now, the game tells you that you should always follow their directions when you're able. The longer paths often contain more rewards, like extra lives or health refills, so there's still an incentive to take the tougher route. What I like about this mechanic is that the game is being very transparent about the challenges ahead, so the only players going down the tougher route are those who voluntarily chose to, or those who failed to keep the correct character alive to access the easier path, which I would say is a suitable punishment. Besides, if your characters are dying all the time, then you definitely need those extra resources anyway. That said, if you think the game is too hard, there is a casual mode which removes knockback and limited lives. This does make things a lot easier, and by all means this is a fine way to experience Curse of the Moon, but it very much changes the feeling of the game. All of a sudden, dangerous sections like this end up feeling significantly less tense, since the threat of being knocked into the pit below is now non-existent. It also makes finding money bags super disappointing. In the normal difficulty, these contribute to your score, and every time you add 10,000 to it, the game will give you an extra life. With the absence of lives, however, your score is completely worthless. So breaking a lantern only to find a bag just becomes a waste of your time, albeit a small one. I appreciate, however, that such an option is there for newcomers. When I first played Curse of the Moon, this was actually the difficulty I picked. At the time, I was worried about losing all of my lives and being forced to start the whole game all over again. That's not what happens, by the way. You just restart at the beginning of the stage. Did I need to pick the easy mode? Probably not. Curse of the Moon isn't too hard even on the regular difficulty, but it did make me a lot more comfortable with the experience at the time. Leave your Toho spam in the comments below. And that is Bloodstained Curse of the Moon. Did I think it held up 8 years later? Well, yeah, obviously. The game knocked it out of the park at everything it needed to. Characters are fun to control, levels are fun to roam around in, the aesthetics are great, and there's plenty of reasons to replay it over and over again. If I were a more predictable man, at this point I'd be making a joke about how my only complaint is that I wish the game was longer. But honestly, it's the perfect length as is. Not every game needs to be some massive adventure that people spend months trying to complete. There's a place for shorter games out there. And besides, if a game is good, then people are going to go back to it anyway, as I've repeatedly done with Curse of the Moon over the last 8 years. Look, this game is fantastic, and if you consider yourself a platformer aficionado to any extent, I cannot stress enough that you need to drop what you're doing and pick this up. I don't think any game can achieve perfection, but Curse of the Moon came really damn close. In 2020, the Bloodstained series dropped its third entry, Curse of the Moon 2, which, as you can imagine, is a direct sequel to what I just talked about. That game is, it's something. I promise I'll talk about this one another day, just, give me some time. Until then, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed my video. I know I was gone for quite a while working on that Shadow Man review, but I'm hoping to resume relatively consistent uploads, at least until I get sucked into another massive project. Take care, y'all.